Foreign Policy Advisor Sir David Manning to assure the Iraqis that an occupation would be good for them in the long run.
You can't suddenly leap from what you have suffered of this terrible authoritarian tyranny to fully fledged pluralist democracy in one easy move.
You realize that what you are giving the Iraqi Interim Authority now in 2003 is far less than you gave to the Iraqi government when you occupied Iraq in 1920. We do not want to make your presence here an issue.
We are perfectly clear that we want to be partners with you and that we want to leave just as soon as we can. But we cannot do that unless we leave behind us structures that are worthy of you.
He left. He didn't even stay for dinner.
We have dinner for you.
No, we have a dinner elsewhere.
Amongst the British diplomats present was Christopher Seagar, the first Foreign Office official to arrive in Baghdad. He reopened the British Embassy, a mansion the British took over during their last occupation.
It was a very odd feeling sitting in the old British Embassy, realizing that we were actually part of a Western occupation administration.
The British say they were never as starry-eyed as the Americans about how they'd be greeted.
I don't think we really believed that tanks were going to be greeted with flowers put down them when they arrived in Baghdad. We thought this was going to be a difficult operation, but it was going to be a manageable operation.
But it was about to get less manageable. Within a fortnight of Bremer's arrival in his role as Viceroy, he issued two highly controversial orders, which today the British believe helped turn the Iraqis against their liberators. Coalition Provisional Order No. 1 was a radical purge of the Ba'ath Party, the revolutionary movement that had propelled Saddam to power and helped keep him there.
Those who were on high before, in particular the Baathists, who used their power to repress the Iraqi people, will be removed from office.
The Ba'ath had done many monstrous things.
The first prisoner has explosives strapped to his body. The prisoner begs for mercy. We can't possibly show the rest of the video, but each prisoner is blown to pieces.
The Baghdad CIA station chief warned Bremer his purge went too deep and would drive up to 50,000 Iraqis underground by nightfall. Before the invasion, the idea had been to restrict de-Baathification to the very top layers of the party. The British say they'd stressed the importance of this to the Americans.
There were real risks in removing from the administration, really right down to quite a low level, people who'd be member of the Ba'ath Party, because they hadn't been member of the Ba'ath Party because they were particularly fond of Saddam Hussein. They were members of the Ba'ath Party because they wanted a job.
Bremer's Coalition Provisional Order No. 2 was to formally disband the Iraqi army of 400,000. Ex-soldiers took to the streets.
You're a former Iraqi soldier. You've got a wife, you've got 6 kids, you have to feed them. You're the breadwinner. And now you don't have a job, but you've got an AK-47. And the insurgent shows up and says, "You shoot an American soldier, I'll pay you $50.
Jay Garner's team are convinced Bremer's disbandment order drove many ex-soldiers into the arms of the insurgents.
I could sit on top of the Republican Palace at night and I could watch American convoys moving around Baghdad. And if an armored convoy moved somewhere, you'd soon see red star clusters going up in the air. If it was a Humvee convoy, you'd see green star clusters. And we could watch movements of Americans. The insurgents were tracking them.
Bremer insists his disbandment order merely formalized what had already happened, that the Iraqi army had disbanded itself by abandoning barracks. It had, but Garner's team say they'd got back in contact with senior Iraqi officers who'd agreed to gather up more and more soldiers to help with reconstruction work.
cardinal sin in combat operations is to lose contact with your enemy. If you can't visually see what your enemy is doing, stay in contact with them, you don't know if they're sneaking around behind you, you don't know if they're reorganizing somewhere, you don't know anything.
Allahu Akbar, Allahumma saddid.
Paul Bremer says the allegation that his disbandment order fueled the insurgency is simply nonsense.
I don't disagree that some members of the insurgency, perhaps many of them, were members of the Fedayeen, Saddam, the Republican Guard, the Special Republican Guard, maybe even the regular army. I don't deny that. But that's not because they weren't offered money, because they were. It's because they want to shoot their way back to power and install another Saddam-like government in Iraq. Those are the facts.
The British say they told the Americans before the invasion that disbanding elite army units could lead to instability.
Our view was that that too was going too far, and that if you were going to have security in Baghdad, which was desperately needed, you needed people who were going to had some sort of competence, who had some experience, who knew the place, who you could pay, who could work with you. And it was better to have them on your side than to have them on the other side.
It's clear the Americans ignored British concerns expressed before the invasion about disbandment and de-Baathification. But it's also clear the British failed to press home their points afterwards. 3 days before Bremer acted, his security advisor Walter Slocum had a day-long meeting in London with Defence and Foreign Office officials and 2 cabinet ministers, Baroness Amos and the then Defence Secretary, Jeff Hoon.
I wrote in my report to Ambassador Bremer a couple of days after the meetings in London. What I said was, if some UK officers or officials think we should try to rebuild and reassemble the old regular army, they did not give any hint of it in our meetings, and in fact agreed with the need for vigorous de-Baathification, especially in the security sector.
None of them raised any concerns about the intention not to recall the army.
They were fully on board with both de-Baathification and the disbandment of the military.
Beyond that, they said to him, they recognized, and again I quote, that the demobilization of the Iraqi army is a fait accompli.
What sort of a fight did Britain's man in Baghdad, John Sawyers, put up against Bremer's orders? In a memo to Number 10, Sawyers expressed concern that de-Baathification went too deep. Jay Garner, however, says Sawyers